Okay, morning everyone. Welcome to NHS Direct's May board. It's very nice to see everybody. I got some apologies. Trevor Jones is away, and Steve Duncan, they're both on holiday. Everyone else is here. We should start with declarations of interest. I haven't received any. Does anybody else want to make any? No? Okay. Very good, let's move swiftly on then to the minutes of the 26th of April. Any matters of accuracy? First off, anything that we didn't get quite right? Ruth?
8.1 should say the Director of Strategy and Planning instead of the Chief Executive.
Okay. Excellent. Tim?
722, are we correct in saying the Finance Committee were asked, or did the Finance Committee do the asking?
So,
Were asked, I think were asked.
Okay.
Yeah, okay.
Remember that? All right. Right, for those of you who pride yourselves on your eagle-eyed reading of all the papers, which I'm sure is everybody, I have a quiz question which I will hang in the air, which is a small prize for the first person who can tell me where in the papers the use of the phrase health visitor should have been health advisor.
I saw it.
Oh, I saw that.
I did too.
Okay.
I don't know where it was though.
That's easy to say, is it?
No,
It's in one of the papers from Finance
I
Committee.
didn't quite sort of. It probably not all correct, isn't it?
All right, so I'm going to leave that one hanging in the air and move on to the action log.
All of the actions that were recorded on the action log are either on the agenda or are closed, so there's actually nothing to report. But I think there is one item under the last minute that we should give an update on, which is the collective grievance.
Yes, please do that.
My understanding is that the panel and two of the members of the panel that heard the collective grievance are here. But as just a quick summary to say that panel has met and has asked the management side and the Royal College of Nursing to agree a process for resolving the difficulty, and that is in hand. And further discussions have taken place with the RCN, and more are due either today or tomorrow. Tomorrow. So simply to keep the board up to date with the fact that we are in process of working with the RCN to resolve this difficulty.
Okay, well that sounds like a constructive way forward, Nick. Would you agree?
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Let's move on then. So, report of the Chair's recent engagements. I have to say that the last one on that list, the Chief Executive kindly stood in for me because I wasn't able to go at the last minute. So, if you have any questions on that one, they should be addressed to him. Okay, fine. Any questions? No? Anything?
Anything happen?
Yeah. Anything happened?
Oh, so the last one, the Healthcare Advisory Forum. This was a meeting pulled together by Oracle, and there were 3 meetings, I think, of different NHS and Department of Health stakeholders, and so we were a subset of those. And essentially, Oracle wanted to know whether we had an interest in being involved in providing them with information and advice on key issues facing the NHS. And I reached the conclusion, which I haven't shared with you yet, Joanne, but I reached the conclusion that actually it was useful. They had a model of an independent advisory forum, so this was not a question of a commercial organisation simply piggybacking on its customers for its own commercial purposes. It was much more. It was much broader than that, and will enable us to get a fairly wide perspective, be it on the kind of back office services that Oracle facilitate through their software and IT solutions, but also on more broad use of IT in the NHS.
And
So I
Nick,
thought it was
just-
useful.
Just mention some of the other key people there, and then I'll give my view on it.
Excuse me, but before you do,
Yep.
just to note that we do have, and the name escapes me, somebody from Oracle on the Innovation Committee
Yes.
as well, so we just need to close that loop.
Yeah,
Yeah,
thank you,
yeah.
Tim. It's fine.
So Mike Farrer, the newly appointed Chief Executive of the NHS Confed, and the Director of Finance for the NHS.
Okay, so my view is some of these things are useful, and it's very important for us to be networked in where the discussions are being held about the future of technology and use in the NHS. So it's relatively uncontroversial, and the side benefit is it's very often a good opportunity to spend time with key stakeholders.
Yeah.
So, Roger.
Can I just go back to your meeting with Christine Conley, Chair, and just
Yes.
ask if there was anything interesting about the position of informatics in relation to 111 that
Yes.
she was able to...
We did not talk about 111.
Okay.
So I'm not able to.
Okay.
Those meetings are always interesting. It was a broader conversation about the information revolution, the fact that the information strategy had been held pending what is effectively a period of purdah
Yep.
through the listening exercise, and the fact that they're using that breathing space to move forward on what have been described as symbolic acts, in the releasing of certain data sets to model, to exemplify what a more open information environment would look like. Knowing that the multi-channel future of 111 is so critical and is something which really the executive are taking the lead on it, and we know how very sensitive it is, that wasn't something that I decided to have a conversation about. And I think, Nick, you and I probably talked about that before that meeting. Anyway, it's always very useful to meet somebody like Kristen. Should we move on then into the performance section of the board agenda? And in particular, let's begin, Nick, with your Chief Executive's report.
Can I take you to item 4 first, so we don't delay
Very good.
making the announcement, although it's public knowledge, that we were very pleased to have appointed Tricia Hamilton as our Chief Nurse and Clinical Director. The panel was chaired by Sue, and Tim and I were on it together with an external assessor, and we were all very pleased to have appointed Tricia. I don't know if you wanted to add anything, Sue or Tim?
No, just welcome officially to the board.
So I think the board, Keisha, will want to note that decision to welcome Tricia in a formal capacity around the table and to express how pleased it is at the outcome. And I mean, it's obviously the right thing to do, to go through an open process and to have and to consider an internal candidate against what the best of the market can offer. And it's very pleasing to know that you were the person who beat what the best of the market could offer. So that's great.
Thank you, Joy. I'm delighted.
And I think it gives you, it should give you a really strong endorsement and confidence to go forward in your role.
Very good. Right, I'll go back to other matters then. The first item was written before I had actually sent this video message out and summary slide pack. It's been previewed, and my delivery, I think, has caused some reflection, and that I need to re-record it. Training, probably. I think it's the result of reading off a script, and you look as though you're reading off a script. You have to be a very clever actor to read off a script and not be reading off a script. So it actually hasn't gone, but it will do very shortly. It'll happen this week, and obviously it's part of engaging, particularly internally with staff at this stage, about our future and the different elements of our strategy for fitting us for the future.
I mean, it is of course really important that we invest in the communications around that, and at some level it seems odd to spend chief executive time on that. Of course it's not. It's absolutely vital. Peter?
Yes, despite the hiccup, I think it's a very good initiative, and I know from the various visits I've made that staff will be encouraged by this And I think the key thing is that it will be good for morale. I mean, measuring morale is always a problem, but people will have their chance. And the key thing for me is that that opportunity allows them to feed back to us, or feed back to you first and to the board, so that we can hear what they're saying, and it will ensure that the debate we have is richer for that.
Yeah.
And I applaud this, and I think, well, I'm always happy to give some personal tuition. I've been involved recently myself, so I know what it's like to not to be able to do it well as do it.
So there'll be a remedial class later. Okay, very good. So,
Could I support everything Peter said? I think it's terrific, and I tick when I read this text, so well done. And it's an opportunity for us as the senior management and the board to demonstrate that we have listened as well. So when we get these things back, we must make sure that we're seen to be following through.
Yes, absolutely.
Even if we say no to some things.
Yes. Well, I'm committed to the communications. I have been since day one of my time here, but I'll just try and do better with the video camera. Okay. Interesting that just linking to the discussion that you were having earlier, the meeting that Joanne went to in terms of publication of data. My understanding is that we're moving to a position where DH will be publishing national data on 111 delivery, and as soon as that has started to happen, then we will start to provide regular updates in terms of data on the 111 pilots that we're involved in directly to the board, and obviously therefore making those public.
that'd be good.
We might pick up performance under the more general performance head, but I've just given a quick update on the production of our report and accounts, which is proceeding. Clearly, any board member wanting to have deeper involvement in the report and accounts, please flag that to Helen, and we'll make sure, or Keisha, and make sure that we involve you. Final element of my report is asking for the board's formal endorsement for that which actually was discussed at the Clinical Governance Committee, but I pulled it out to highlight it here, which, because it's a key element going into the report and accounts for this year, are quality improvement priorities for next year, or sorry, for this year that we are now in. Effectively, we had said for those areas where we have not yet attained the goals that we set for 10-11, we will continue with those. So it's not that we're moving to a different set of priorities, we are adding to them in addition those items that I've identified there in terms of call quality, prompt clinical assessment for less urgent patients, and improving patient experience. So I wanted the board's endorsement to those.
Okay, does the board want to discuss that, or is the board happy to endorse it as written in the Chief Executive's report? It sounds like that's controversial.
Thank you.
Good. Any other questions, comments on the Chief Executive's report, or questions for the Chief Executive? No? Good. Let's move on then. To the performance package, which I'll ask Trevor Smith to introduce.
Okay, thank you, Chair. As you'll see, for the start of the new financial year, we have adapted the format of both the performance and finance reports. We continue to develop those, and we're looking to embed them during the first quarter of the year for use in the remainder of this financial year. Key performance headlines for the first month of the year: nearly 400,000 patient and user contacts were made with the core service during April. Access rates for the service dipped slightly in terms of time to enter the service. 92% of patients and users being answered within 1 minute, and 2.1% of users abandoning their calls. We continue to deliver our targets for the most urgent clinical priorities, dealing with 96% of patients and users within 20 minutes, and our performance for less urgent and non-urgent clinical assessments improved during the month, although both remain just slightly below contract targets. Over half of our calls completed did not need any onward referral to other health providers, and our patient and user satisfaction levels remain good. Sickness continues to be an area of concern, focus and attention, and is the subject of a separate report within this section. In terms of our financial performance, we've reported a surplus in the month, which is in line with our plan. We have a cash balance of £17 million. Capital expenditure for the month was just £43,000, and a revised and updated capital programme was discussed at the Finance Committee, which will be reported on from month 2.
Thank you.
Happy to take any questions.
And the other thing that people may have comments or questions on is the new layout of the performance package. So I had a couple of sotto voce. Would anybody like to articulate some comments on that? Peter, then Louisa, and then Tim.
On the layout?
Well, on anything actually.
Oh yeah, well I thought it was really good and easy to read. I heard other people saying earlier, so I won't go too far, let them say, but I do think it's an easy read, and you can quite easily capture projections and concerns and good news all quite easily with a sweep of the eye. I think that's excellent. My other comment, I'm just so annoyed that we're tantalising so close to a royal flush, and we've only got a pair of kings in the end, and well, I mean it in the nicest way, because some of these are very close to hitting target. That's what I mean by that. But if you don't, you don't, and it's like being relegated from the Premier League. You either get the points or you don't get the points. So I'm encouraged. I'm encouraged. But it is good news because they're continually going up in my understanding. So that's why these charts are so good. They actually show you that although we're tantalisingly close, we've been gradually getting closer and closer. And I really do think this is very encouraging. I mean, obviously the difficult areas with sickness we'll come on to, but I thought this was a really helpful presentation, but it's just tantalisingly we just need to push ourselves over the line. Thank you.
Thanks, Peter. Louisa.
No, I just want to say I thought it was fantastic. I mean, really, really nice and clear. And the only point is the expert core review scoring good to excellent, which is sort of 67%. I think are we meant to be 80%?
Yes.
And I noticed that there's a target. So we're saying that's an improvement, and maybe I just didn't quite register before, and that seems so important to us that I know we've sort of looked at how we can improve that, and I know there have been changes in the nutrition.
I'm going to let Tricia answer that before coming back to Tim for his comment or question.
We did discuss last month the changes we've made to the how core review is being undertaken, and you can see there has been a significant improvement from last month as the embedding in of the core review process is taking place. So I feel every confidence will be hitting that 80% in the next month or so.
Okay, so you have every confidence in hitting the 8%. Okay. Well, it's being minuted. Yeah, very good.
By when, sorry?
We did say initially that we would have 6 months period of
we did.
That's
why.
process.
That's why.
But I feel confident in the next 2 months we'll see a.
What I think I would suggest we ought to try and do is to do a trajectory, so that you know, from my understanding of the conversations we've had at the Clinical Governance Committee, it is actually going to take some time, and is dependent partly on bedding down of the team managers and the rest of the processes. So I think if we could have a trajectory to the 80%, and if that takes 4 or 5 months, but then we'll be able to measure that you're meeting that target.
Okay, that's good. So the minute, what we have agreed as a board is that we will have a trajectory, and we will see how we perform. Is that good? I think that's helpful. Tim.
Thank you. I thought the presentation was far, far better. Very, very easy to read, so it's terrific. Two things, actually. Firstly, on page 5 of 9, where we've got abandonment rates, and we've got April, on the right-hand side of the chart, we've got April the 11th. Is good, but when was Easter? I think, do these numbers include Easter?
Both Easter and the bank holiday.
Are both in that number?
Yeah.
So that's a really incredible difference from performance across Christmas to Easter. That's very, very significant. So I think that's a terrific achievement. Well done. And the other thing that occurred to me looking at this is I started to think about some trends. Two things actually. One is on page 7, health and symptom checker usage. I'm not sure. I tried to draw a line through it, forgetting about December and January, and I'm not. Has it plateaued? And should we do something about that? question. I really couldn't tell. I'm not enough of a statistician to do that, but it looks as though growth in use of the health and symptoms plateaued. I'm not sure, so maybe we could ask the executive to come back, unless you've got a comment about that now.
I'm not sure that it's plateaued. I think we saw a particularly high increase over Christmas.
Yeah.
We do have a communications and marketing strategy around the health and symptoms checkers, but I'll take that back and I'll come back to you with more information.
There's a danger there. And the other thing that
It's again, excuse me, can I just interject there? Is it somewhere another aspect where we ought to have a trajectory?
Yes.
Okay.
I mean, the critical
we've still got to agree the target for
we do. The critical issue is our syndication approach. So it's our approach is to get our health and symptom checkers put where patients naturally go onto the internet, and to populate other people's websites with our health and symptom checkers.
Okay. Thank you.
May I add to that, please, Joanne?
Yes, sorry, I was looking down and sort of
that's okay.
So you're poised in midair.
You were
doing the right thing.
I was doing the right thing, yeah. Just one other thing that, in terms of our health and symptoms checkers, is that from on Wednesday, we are working in partnership with Channel 4 and Maverick TV, who are the producers of Embarrassing Bodies, where they will be having a series of programmes which are called In the Clinic, so less embarrassing bodies, one could argue, which will be making a feature of our health and symptoms checkers.
Okay.
And so what we have planned for is that will then bring that to an attention of a much larger range of people, and we have similarly forecast higher rates of usage thereafter. So it's essentially free advertising for us.
Well, that's good news. That's good news.
And the launch of the mobile app,
Oh, the mobile
which we
app,
are
yes.
very close to.
Okay.
So if it has plateaued, and you can't really tell from the chart, it looks as though it may have done, then we've got actions in hand to get it on the upward curve again, which is really important. And finally, sorry, Joanne, to
it's fine.
this, kept me from the Sunday Times listing yesterday.
Lucky for you.
With Peter saying we're so close on less urgent calls and non-urgent, 1992, and then you look at our time with patients. Where's it gone? Thank you. 43. Are we at a point now to begin to understand if we could get time to patients up by another 5%, say, would that fix our 60-minute, 120-minute? Can we start to think about some interactions between this data, which we've now got to behind us?
Yes.
My every waking thought.
Excellent.
Of course, we are thinking about that. There is a relationship. There is a relationship between the amount of time that our staff are waiting for calls, which has a cross-correlation to stress levels, because otherwise if it's less than 15% of their time, then the calls come one after the other, there's no time to think. But another key contributor to the non-achievement of that particular target is making sure that we have the right staff rostered at the right times of the days and weeks. So it's what we are achieving at the moment is there are about 10 hours a week which are causing the issues that where we've got insufficient staff. So it's a direct correlation to that.
Excellent.
Yeah. So time with patients comes as you've got better.
So we know what we need to do to close.
We absolutely, but it's not as we've discussed as a board. It's not something that we can change overnight because it has such a fundamental impact.
Very good.
Yeah, had an interesting conversation with the medical director here just about two of the bar charts, and we're wondering if you look at the abandonment rate and the health symptom checker usage, which peaks in December, January, they do look quite interesting. And abandonment rates are high December, January, symptom checker use goes up. And it was just wondering if there was some.
I think Renette's got your answer.
There's of course there's a direct correlation, if not a causal effect, of people not able to get through to the call centre that will then be hearing a message which says, have you tried the internet service first.
So it was.
So there is, of course, a direct correlation between the two, if not a causal link.
Fantastic. Well, that's useful.
But that doesn't mean that we will make it more difficult for our patients to get through to our call centres so that we can increase the performance on our health and symptoms checkers.
But it is important that they have somewhere else to go, given the difficulties we're having.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And more people are now using our services via the internet than they are via calling our services.
Really, that's really good.
And the underlying thing is we're measuring the right things. Is what I'm a general conclusion I would take from the conversation we just had.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, Tim.
I'm just presumably the number is
Yeah,
missing a
the number's
digit under total volumes patient choice, April 11, it's missing a naught.
It's in the chart.
It's in the
just
chart.
yeah.
The chart looks right, so which is very helpful to see the chart.
It's 245,000.
Yes, sorry,
Yeah.
yes,
Yeah.
yes, I'll make sure that is corrected.
Yeah.
Very good.
Okay, yeah, got it. Now, that gives you the Eagle Eye Award for this.
But not for the health visiting.
Not for the health visiting, no, we'll pick that one up when we get to it. Okay, fine. Thank you. Okay, so I think that was a good discussion, and I very much endorse Tim's point. We're measuring the right things, and we're presenting them in a way that facilitates insight and good discussion, which I think is fantastic. And should we perhaps, Nick, as a board, extend our thanks to Ashwin for the work that he has done on this performance package and the way it's presenting. So perhaps somebody could thank you for that. Trevor, do you want to carry on into finance, perhaps?
I'm happy to take any questions on it.
Are we going to talk about the annualised scorecard?
Would you like to just say a couple of words about it and then open it up for questions?
Well, no, it's just that I think there's a little error on there as well. But actually, I think what I was wanting to say is that in a year, which, and this comes the linkage in with the financial performance as well, in which we have had such significant reductions in terms of the amount of money that the trust has been able to spend. Although the performance has not been as good as we would like it to be, on retrospect I think we've had a credible year against a backdrop of great amount of change, and I wondered whether the board thought that was the case as well.
So, any board member comments about Renette's sort of overall observation on our performance in 2010-11, given the backdrop of significant financial pressure and taking a lot of cost out of our business? Sue, then Louisa.
Yeah, it's interesting because I wanted to ask a question on a graph in the finance section, which sort of plays into that. If we look at page 7 of 10 on the finance, there's a graph which I think is really interesting in that it shows the whole time equivalents in the organisation last year in fact, plus budget going forward, and the significant reduction in whole time equivalents that reflects. I suppose the question I have is to what those reductions are predicated on the basis that we would drive productivity through the organisation. And I suppose the question I have is to what extent is the clinical performance access targets being missed a reflection of the fact that we are not driving that productivity, and therefore do we have a risk that in the future when we have these budgets we will continue to miss the clinical access performance targets?
Okay, so what you're saying is where cost constraints are driving down the number of staff.
Yes.
We can only meet our performance targets if our productivity goes up.
Correct.
If we have any doubts about our ability to do that, are we potentially looking at future performance issues?
Shall I kick off and give just a very high level kind of comment on that? I think it is a difficult balance to strike. I think particularly in view of the contract reductions that we have seen and agreed to. If you look back not only over last year, but even back into 9-10 and into the current year, the combination of those financial years, across the 3 years, we've taken contract reductions of roughly £33 million.
Yeah.
And in cash terms, that's something like a £70 million benefit for the NHS across those 3 years. So it's been an extremely aggressive programme and an extremely fast programme. I think it's important that we just
Acknowledge
have to
that.
acknowledge it, and we have to continue to manage it carefully, because we've got to go even further going forwards to improve our efficiency and improving our effectiveness at the same time.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think sort of noted, aware is the response to your concern, legitimate concern. I think Louisa was next.
Yeah, and I think I did think that it was good to acknowledge, you know, the work that's been done, and you're right. I mean, it's not just the sort of financial change. There's been, I think my impression when you go out and talk to people is there's always an enormous amount of change within NHS Direct, but recently there feels to have been a lot more change and a lot of that feels much more sort of potential for upheaval. So I think the fact that we are just narrowly missing things is clearly there has been an increase in productivity and people really are, striving to do their best. I mean, it worried me a bit that maybe some of that was reflected in that sort of leap in long-term sort of sickness, and that there was a sort of cost being reflected in that. But I think Lynette's right that actually it's important to acknowledge what this shows.
Yeah, thank you, Louisa. Do you want to respond to that directly?
No, it was a comment about two particularly important KPIs for me. One is that nearly 60% of the users and patients who come into our service don't require onward referral.
Yeah.
So there's a big benefit to the wider NHS, and equally that 93% of all of our patients and users are very satisfied with our service.
Yes, I think we should certainly keep those in sight. Peter.
Yeah, I do think it's been a very tough year for the managers and the staff to adjust to the new arrangements. The sort of comments that we had about micromanaging them will go away, I think, now, and given the team efforts that can now be applied to the way we do our business, I think that we're going to see quite a big shift in hopefully an attitude anyway, as well as the ability to be flexible, which is the point about responding to demand, because it's about being able to switch on and off the response to demand.
Yeah.
And I think that is something which is happening and is coming along nicely, I may say so, even though it's a bit painful. So I think we should congratulate our staff on these results, and also, I mean, the upcoming period of change, which I think they're reacting to extremely positively, and good for them, I say, and good for you as in arranging for it to happen as well.
Very good. Thank you, Peter. That's encouraging. Nick.
Just wanted to make a few points and one specific one. Just the kind of general view. We set ourselves stretch targets, and these are what's reflected in this report. And sometimes the very clear way in which we rag rate the results actually hides our light under a bushel to some extent. So, for example, the bottom one, last year we reduced our management costs through the definition, recurring management costs, as using the definition that the rest of the NHS uses, by not the 30% target that we'd set, but by 28%. So in 1 year we reduced our recurring management cost by 28%, and we're marking it as amber here. And that is a really big, it was a really big thing to do, and we're clear about why we've not quite done it, and we're pushing ahead to put that right in the following year. But I just wanted to get the general point across that we're creating stretch targets here, and I'm very conscious of that as I write the formal annual report, that we should be rightly accountable, but we need to put it in its proper context.
Good. Okay. Thank you.
The specific point was, in so doing, I have been digging into frontline staff attrition. Last year we recruited 100 whole-time equivalent frontline staff, And the measure that you have here, I'm not quite sure whether it really accords with the experience, but we're measuring the experience of 100 staff, and I think we just need to stand back and see the wood for the trees sometimes. So stretch targets and just sometimes a small sample, sometimes on that particular issue.
All right, thank you, Nick. Then I'm going to just ask if there are any particular questions on finance. No.
Chair, the only thing I would say in here, what we're trying to do is it's clearly important that we get off to a good start this year, which we have done. Month one, it's always very early to draw conclusions from, but we need to continue to monitor the position very closely as we go forward. What we are trying to do with the finance report this year is to tie in and integrate both activity levels, staffing numbers, and the associated financial results. So that's what we're looking to try and develop as we go forwards.
Fine, thank you. The next on the agenda is sickness absence. I'm going to suggest that we take that into the private transport, given the fact that it is becoming increasingly an issue of competitive confidentiality. So the figures are there for people to see. The conversation is going to be a private one. So we'll move on to major project summary.
And I'm happy to answer. This is the last time that you will see this report in this format, and we will be incorporating this into the programme work streams into the future. So I'm happy to answer any questions on it.
But there probably won't be any. Okay, there's a steer from the chair. Okay, fine. Thank you very much. All right, so I think what we've concluded is we set ourselves challenging targets. We continue to struggle to meet them, but we're not doing. Well, I think there are many aspects of our performance which we should be pleased with, and we should acknowledge the effort that goes on underneath. Thank you. Okay, so let's move on then into the governance and compliance section of our agenda today. And Nick, we have a couple of small changes to the register of interest, which I think are not interesting enough to be discussed. I mean, fascinating for the individuals concerned, no doubt, and to be congratulated. We should go on to just take the minutes and the verbal report of the Finance Committee. Is that right? So minutes are from March, which the March meeting you have already reported verbally.
Yes, I have. I think I will say something. I think I'll take questions in the minutes. I will say something about the extraordinary finance committee that we had as a result of the discussion we had at the last board. You'll see when we get to it in the agenda that the conversion programme has now been drawn up with key outputs in place against each of the actions. We had a pretty good discussion, and I'm grateful for the colleagues on the Finance Committee who make themselves available for that meeting actually at short notice. We've got key outputs from the investment programmes, and the action that's placed on the executive is now to, where possible, quantify those outcomes, and we will be using that quantification and the progress against that as part of the budget preparation of next year's budget. So I think the Finance Committee is in a much more comfortable place with the investment programme now, and we can pick up points of detail because that's later on in the agenda.
Good, thank you. So you took that on our behalf, Tim. We're very pleased that you've been able to do that, and we're even more pleased that you've been able to come back and say you have got a raised comfort level on this very important strategic programme.
Yeah, and I don't know whether you want to add to what I said.
No, nothing to add to that, Tim.
It was a very good meeting, and the pack we had was far better than the one of the last board.
Okay. I mean, obviously we'll continue to work on this question of what detail comes to the board and what detail gets dealt with in other places, but I think we will be relying on the Finance Committee to do some of that detailed work on behalf of the board, and that sounds as if it's a good process, so thank you.
Yeah, and we've got a programme of work with this built into it for the rest of the year. So.
Okay, good. Excellent. Okay, so we've got some audit committee minutes, Peter.
We've had these last.
We've had them, so
if there were any
have
further
verbal
questions, I'll answer them, but we've already discussed them before. But these are the formal noting.
Of the minutes, yeah. Sue, I think we're in the same position with you. Yeah. So we've had verbal reports on both of these meetings. If there are any specific questions on the minutes, we can take them. Okay, fine, very good. In that case, that completes the governance and compliance section of the agenda, and we can move straight on to stakeholder engagement. I believe we have a few visits. Renee, there's a list of visits that you've made, but they I would believe are in your normal course of business. So
I thought we'd agreed that we would capture those where execs have been.
Yes.
All right. Okay. Yes. They were in my normal course of business, but they were on all the bank holiday days as well. So.
Okay. Yes.
So not quite my normal course of business, but yes.
All right. And Sue, you've been to Southampton.
Yes.
For the 111 workshop.
I attended the seminar that was jointly held with the South Central SHA to start the discussions around the 111 rollout in that patch. And I had to say I was impressed. I thought the level of engagement increased in the room as we were discussing issues. And I think there was a recognition that it is a unique opportunity to look again at how urgent care is actually provided on the patch, and a recognition that things will need to change. Lots of planning seems to be going on, and we position ourselves as a willing and informed partner, which I think was exactly the right position to be. So early days, but actually I was heartened by the response.
Good, that's very interesting. So it sounds as though the people who have been involved in organising those, which I assume were Brian, Ruth, teams, they should be feeling good about it.
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't know if as the executive side of that, you want to comment on it at all? Tell us how things are going.
So this was probably the second of such a
It was
workshop.
the first one I went to, which I admit it's probably changed since.
But one of the messages I've given to the regional directors is that if we have events like that, to invite the non-executives if they're able to make it. So that was the first of 2 events for the South Central patch. Interesting that people are looking to us in terms of our experience on 111 pilots. But also in respect of helping commissioners understand what it is they need to commission.
Okay. Good.
Yeah, there have been 3 full workshops. Sue's at the first, and Nicholas at the The last one was really a solo visit by some GPs, which highlighted that and this was reflected by some of the partners, that they're having some difficulties with clinical engagement in discussing urgent care and 111 on their own patch, and that was reflected somewhat in the workshop. So I think that was the only issue that I was slightly disappointed with, that we didn't have as many GPs at the workshops that I would have liked, but we had a broad spread of other providers of urgent care.
So I mean, it's good that those things are happening and that they're happening effectively. It's disappointing how difficult it is to get people to engage on urgent care. And I'll just share with you another personal disappointment of mine, which was a recent publication by the King's Fund, 10 top things for commissioners to think about. And they talked about urgent care and they didn't talk about 111. And that seemed to be, a really odd and regrettable lapse, and it's something that we're going to pick up with them and see if we can get the King's Fund to engage on it, because that would, I think, would be helpful. Great. Renette, do you want to give any feedback from your bank holiday visits?
I think, did I not feedback at the last board meeting? But I think that the big difference this bank holiday compared to the previous bank holidays at Christmas was that there was a much greater feeling of calm in the call centres, and staff even had time on the royal wedding to when the phones all went quiet at about 11 o'clock. So some staff had the opportunity to actually watch her getting out of the car, which seemed to be watching the dress was the most important thing. But
what else would it be?
It went quiet again when they went on the balcony, strangely, which we will of course put into our forecast for future royal weddings in terms of call volumes. Seriously though, I think that the staff. The staffing situation that we had over the bank holidays was much better. That then led to a greater feeling of everyone feeling that their contribution was making a real difference in terms of our access levels, etc., which it absolutely was.
Yeah.
And what we also were able to test was the interplay between what our shift managers do and what our national real-time coordinators do, and the responsiveness of moving staff around from working in one particular way to a different way in order to deal with different demands was first class. So so therefore what I did during my visits was I made myself useful, making tea very poorly, and also dealing with some administrative type activities as well to lend a hand.
Okay, good, thank you, Tricia.
I think the other thing to add to that, Chair, is we had a number of staff who wouldn't normally have worked the bank holiday weekends who came into the call centres to support staff by walking the floor and doing other duties, but taking on some of the responsibilities such as vulnerable adult referrals, child protection referrals, and generally supporting staff in key decision making and clinical support as well. And I think that needs to be recognised, and it was certainly valued by the staff as well. Feeding back to me personally, it was nice to see senior clinicians within call centres being proactive and helping support frontline service delivery.
Yeah. Great, that's a very encouraging thing to see. Yeah. I think it's excellent. Good.
And likewise, senior management.
Yeah.
Tricia and I we were on most of the weekends as well, weren't you?
So that's great. I mean, we do provide such a valuable service when the rest of the NHS is closed. It's always a huge challenge, and it's obviously a very good thing that we can demonstrate senior management, senior clinical commitment to that, because it is such a strain and it's so important that we do it well.
And just so that bank holidays aside, in terms of what I've been using my visits to deal with, to engage with, is more with our first line managers cohort, and there is a board seminar on this next month, so the board will be able to hear directly from people who have been affected. But I have been really very, very pleased and impressed with the progress that our line managers have been making in terms of properly understanding the important role that they have within the organisation, understanding the challenges that are facing them, and also their real can-do attitude of trying to make a real difference to the performance and the clinical quality of the service that we deliver. So I think all the effort that we did put in last year in terms of the reconfiguration of the first line management is starting to bear fruit now, and that's what I've heard in my engagement with managers directly.
Thank you. That's a really valuable thing for you to bring back to the board.
We're not there yet, but there's still much to do. But
just wanted to piggyback on that comment about team managers, because both for frontline and for kind of back office teams, the first line team manager's role in terms of communications is absolutely critical, and we are making sure that in the communications approach that we have over the next period is that we build in materials and time for team managers to absorb communication messages and materials ahead of being asked to get involved directly themselves in helping to communicate it with their team members. And it's just recognising that stepwise process equips team managers to answer questions and to go forward confidently with their team and not feel kind of, undermines the wrong word, but not adequately prepared for communications that we put out.
Very good. Okay, thank you. All right then. Well, I think that was a useful set of feedback, and I know that little conversation we just had seemed to me to exemplify why we have this thing on the agenda. So we've heard about what's going on in our contact centres from our staff's point of view. We've heard a bit about interaction with stakeholders around external stakeholders around the key issue. So I think thank you for everybody, well, particularly Sue and Renette around that, and Tricia. But I think that was very helpful. All right, bring the external world and our call centres into the boardroom, and that was a good way of doing it. Let's move on then to the service quality review on GP out-of-hours services. Nick, I wonder whether I might ask you just to introduce that for us today.
Okay. So I think this is work in progress. We have undertaken a service review of our out-of-hours services, and that has been discussed in the Clinical Governance Committee. There is due to be a full action plan agreed as a result of that discussion, which I don't think is yet reflected in the papers that you have in front of you. There are clearly some issues that we need to work on, and I think Tricia and Sue would be able to talk about those. But in looking ahead, what we need to recognise is that where we have GP out-of-hours services today, tomorrow we will have 111 services. And the most important thing that we need to do is to learn the lessons from how we review and provide services on GP out-of-hours, learn those lessons and apply them to how we will work with 111. And I think in due course we need to come back to the board to demonstrate that we've closed that loop.
Tricia, do you want to follow that up at all? I think we were expecting an action plan with this, weren't we? And that we haven't got it this time around.
We need to bring that. We'll bring that to the next board meeting. Just 3 key points, really, Chair, is that I'd like to reassure the board from this review that there were no patient safety issues.
Yeah.
Secondly, that the key account managers have made a significant impact in our stakeholder engagement. So that's real positive from the review. And our GP out-of-hours services, we've recognised that we need to undertake some further clinical audits within those services. But the key message is from the totality of the review that we are providing a safe service to patients.
Sue, is there anything you'd like to add?
Just that the Clinical Governance Committee has gone through the main report very thoroughly, discussed the issues, and as Nick says, the important thing is making sure that we carry forward the learning from this report into the 111 service. I think the service quality reviews, they do take an inordinate amount of time to do. There's a lot of effort that goes into them, which is appreciated. I look forward to the West Yorkshire report.
Yeah.
I think the process will improve the more we do.
Yeah, good. Thank you, Sue. Okay. Does anybody then have any questions about this particular service quality review, recognising that we're going to bring it back to the board with the action plan and with the implications of what has come out of this review for the development of 111? Yeah. Okay, that's fine then. Thank you very much. We should then, I guess the choice is whether we take a break now before the board call recording. I think we should.
We're ahead of time.
We're ahead of time. Okay, no,
But
people
that's
feel.
the last agenda. That's the last item.
It is. Okay. All right. So we're going to march on.
Sorry,
and talk about the board call recording. Tricia, would you like to introduce it?
Yes.
Oh, actually, sorry, I'm having launched you. Really bad. Sorry. I know that one or two people haven't had an opportunity to listen to these. Could they fess up so that we have a sense of who?
Oh, I'm the only person.
No, I couldn't get access to this at the weekend. I did try, Chair. I put time aside and I did try. And it wasn't.
All right. So most of us around the table have had the opportunity to listen to them.
Yep.
Trisha, you'll introduce them.
They're very short.
Yes, thank you,
They're
Chair.
very short, and I'm sure that will come into the conversation.
From our last board recordings where we reviewed callers who'd had experience with emotional or mental health problems, the board...
The last one was out of hours, wasn't it?
Yes, the last one.
The one before.
So forgive me.
Yeah, mental health is March.
That's right,
Recent.
it was the calls in the out of hours, I beg your pardon, and the board requested we have a comparison with GP out of hours and GP calls to compare the different patient experiences. So the two calls that we had presented to us this time were two GP calls from our West Yorkshire Urgent Care Service. And I think the key point that everybody has recited back to me today is the succinctness of those assessments, and the call lengths were significantly less than those undertaken by nurses. The first call relates to a caller who was seeking assurance as to whether to start some medication that had been prescribed by a GP under various circumstances, and the caller rang and spoke to the GP, who confirmed the taking of the appropriate medication was the right thing to do under those circumstances. And in that scenario, we, as the board has requested, asked the patient in seeking consent their patient experience, and they were very satisfied with the experience they had on that occasion, and would recommend service to their patients and use the service again. And we also reviewed the call in the hypothetical experience of a 111. Now, there have been some questions. We believed, understanding the core contract requirements of a 111 service, that this call would have been transferred directly through to a GP for advice. Now, we understand in the current service delivery of 111, we are not transferring calls to GPs. Okay. We actually send them to that service, and they then call the patient back rather than the transfer. Patient number 2 was a female patient who was 14 weeks pregnant. She'd had a previous history of some problems in her previous pregnancies. She called our service seeking reassurance and guidance as to whether she should seek any further advice. GP undertook that call, less than 5 minutes, was having some difficulty navigating the systems, so agreed with the patient to actually call the patient back with the appropriate information, because it was the GP's decision that the patient should seek further support and clarification from the early pregnancy unit that was available in this particular patient's location. And we didn't have on the call reviews the second call that was made back to the patient, and on both calls, due to the difficulty in finding the calls and the time constraints getting them prepared for board members, we also couldn't identify the health advisor aspects of the calls.
So both of those calls would have been preceded by a call, but by their incoming call to the health advisor, who would have assessed them and then got the GP to ring them back.
Correct.
Yes, so we didn't hear that.
So
Okay.
we were missing that little bit of the journey. If this patient reported that she had a positive experience and scored 9 out of 10, she would recommend it to family and friends, and she would have attended accident and emergency if the service had not been available. And equally, we believed if in the principles of 111, again, this would have been transferred to a GP for telephone assessment in a 111 service.
Thanks, Trish. Okay, so any thoughts, observations, reactions to those calls from people who use them, listen to them, I should say? I mean, I have, but I'll let someone else go first. Renette?
Before we launch into that, I had some comments, but I'd be welcome hearing others. Is that in the West Yorkshire Urgent Care Service, the GPs, with patients' explicit consent, which I only heard in the second call, not in the first, are able to get access to the patient's summary care record through the system. Okay. So there is, on the screen, the doctors are able to see a bit more background information than we would have under the 0845 service, or in fact any of our other out-of-hours services that we offer as well. And then, so that's one thing. And the second thing, I know we couldn't find the health advisor calls, but I suppose my other question to Trish was whether a nurse advisor may have been in the process for these calls as well. So they might have had a nurse advisor who then referred to the GP rather than streamed. I don't know whether that's the case.
I will clarify that point, Chair.
Yes,
My understanding is these were directly referred to GP.
From the health
they went
advisor.
from the health advisor straight to the GP.
Right. Okay. Well, I'll come in there. I mean, I think, as Trish already mentioned, the thing which was very striking was the length of calls. And for me, who fits into the fixer, they were kind of perfect calls. There was a question and there was an answer. And obviously, when I think about that and compare it to a more the general NHS Direct experience, where one goes through a sort of more holistic assessment process before being able to answer one's question, the worry would be that you miss something by diving straight in and answering the question. And I suppose what I thought about that was the nurse advisor has already done that assessment, therefore sort of enabling the doctor to really focus on answering the patient's question. And I thought that it was very noticeable. I think this is probably a doctor's skill on the whole, is the ability to really focus and to do it quickly without the patient at all feeling rushed. Because I didn't think there was any feeling of rush in there, despite the fact that they were 5-minute calls or less. So it was very interesting, and I thought, wouldn't it be fantastic? There's a sort of best of both model in there somewhere, which is very difficult to, don't quite know what that's like. But I thought it was fascinating to be able to compare the two. Yeah.
I mean, yeah, because one's a triage system and one is a fix-it system.
Absolutely.
And I was impressed actually, because I thought that they did it sort of quickly, but I felt there was real empathy and also sort of nice sense from the second call of sort of local knowledge. It's a different hospital now, isn't it? And so it was like sort of I thought it was perfect. And I suppose like you, I sort of think that triage is obviously so important for safety. It sometimes just feels so meandering, and when it is such a thing of this is my with the palliative care lab example, and even with the example of the woman who had a miscarriage, you wonder whether, as you say, you want the best. It'd be nice to get the best of both worlds, and I guess that probably isn't impossible, because we've got a whole lot of learning about our triage and our algorithms and whatever. And you cut to the chase quicker.
Cut to the chase. And isn't it, there's often a discussion that one hears that GPs are more comfortable in accepting risk. Tim?
So I wondered whether what we were looking at was the different framework in which GPs and nurses operate, essentially, and that GPs are allowed to do the cut to the chase, answer the question without worrying about the other issues. And I wonder to what extent nurses as a generality are not allowed to do that, or whether that is our interpretation as an organisation of what nurses are or aren't allowed to do, and therefore whether we are able to shave away at what we're expecting our nurses to do. I appreciate that they are allowed to operate without reference, particularly to the protocols and algorithms and so forth, although they tend to start with before skipping questions and sections. GPs don't need to do that. They're scriptless. For me, this was exactly what goes on in the GP surgery, but down the wire. But I did think for the second call, the woman with bleeding, that I was absolutely set for the symptom checker, because essentially what the GP said was, vaginal bleeding, nothing you can do about it. Yes, you do. It's worth getting some advice when advice next opens, whether that's Tuesday after the bank holiday or whatever. But that's it, and that could come across on the symptom checker perfectly. And I haven't actually run it through the symptom checker, but I was intending to do so and shall do so. And I therefore just wondered. So the final thought on that was, could our health advisor not have inquired? Perhaps she did, do you have access to the internet? That will provide you with the answer. Is there not some way that one could have short-circuited the 5 minutes of GP time altogether? I don't know.
I'm going to jump in there before Tim, because I think for me, the thing I forgot to say was it's 5 minutes of GP time, but she waited, what, 5 hours?
To get it. Absolutely.
And that second patient, I mean, that's an incredibly worrying time. And the value to her of having gone through the symptom checker, the value of an instant response, I think would have been really, really high. And that's where maybe 111 scores above what we're doing now. Sorry, Tim, I jumped in, and then Louisa wants to say something.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's a new term I get. The phone side manner of both the doctors was absolutely terrific, I thought. If that's a term that we think about. The bit that worried me is that the second call couldn't find the telephone number. And then we had, I don't know what happened next. I was thinking, did the doctor actually go and find that number and ring back? Which is probably, which is probably a waste of his time. Because somebody else could have got that info, because that's an information job. And I don't know, it just, that's what occurred to me at the end, after I listened to the call. And I thought,
it as long to tell someone to do it.
Yeah,
it might be, but on the other hand, anyway,
do it live.
There's a bit of a loony loop there that we need to, which is got rid of by having the information up to date there.
Louisa.
Oh, it's just a really small point. I mean, I think that the symptom checks are great. I had realised, I just forgot about that 5 hour wait. Which is, I think that there is some conditions, like sort of, that miscarriage, where you end up wanting to speak to somebody just because of the emotive nature.
Nick?
Helen,
sorry, I'm going to ask you to round off the conversation, so I'll let Helen go first.
I just wanted to pick up on what Tim had said about the differences between nurses and doctors and GPs. I mean, with a nursing background, and still am, the majority of my clinical practice was in general practice. So I think it's very much about how the nurses in NHS Direct are, trained how to use algorithms. But I would actually say that from my own experience, I used to do telephone advice and things like that, very much around how the GP operated.
That's very interesting. So you, as a nurse in general practice, would cut to the chase in a similar way. Okay, Josh, did you want to say something?
Yeah, just very quickly, Chair. I think this is a perfect example of how in a 111 world we can find compromise between what we've delivered in our core service under the NHS Direct banner and what we can deliver in a new 111 service. I think there is a lot our nurses can learn from our GPs, and we know already our GPs have learned a great deal from our nurses as well regarding assumptions and remote clinical assessment. So I absolutely agree with the other comments made. There is a halfway house in what we can do with our clinical assessment going forward.
Best of both, I think, is probably something to aim for. Brian?
Well, it's just the nursing and our triage service is completely different from what the GPs are seeking to do.
Yeah.
And the GP has gone in there seeking to treat rather than really seeking to assess. You do a quick assessment, but really you're looking for the problem to treat it. And that's not what our health advisors and nurses are doing. And I think that's something that a lot of GPs would be frustrated if they heard the nursing side of it, because they'd say, well, it's perfectly obvious to me what needs to happen. So we just need to be careful that we don't present it as short and sweet and they cut to the chase, and that's what the nurses should be doing, because it's completely different role.
Which is why the halfway house is important.
It's back to my previous point, my previous question really, which is, I think that in both these cases, the doctor would have thought that a nurse had done the thorough assessment, and that's why I think it is important that the whole patient journey and the expectation in the GP's mind is set. But
I think it just is a
wouldn't make any difference.
If somebody phones up to show my husband take steroids, you never get do you have chest pain, do you feel? I mean, it's just a completely different framing, which is what is the problem that the patient has that I'm trying to solve.
Yes, okay. I'm just going to say, I'm not too sure that doctors would feel these were. I mean, I took about 8 of these calls in a half an hour on Friday. That's normal for GPs. So they would say this is straightforward. What's the problem? You've got the patient record, and so it's a completely different process. So And actually, well, I want to talk to Trish about some of the issues in the second one. I'm not 100% sure that I thought the phone being around for the number, and I can't remember that I asked were there any crumpy pains.
Yeah, you did. You did ask about yes. Bellyache, you said. Peter, so we're going to pick that up.
I don't only have three short things to say. The actual style of these conversations were very relaxed. We've already heard they're empathetic, and they actually picked out just a couple of things to make it personal, so it's personalised.
Yeah,
and
the little boy.
And there was absolute confidence around the outcome, the result.
Yeah.
And I felt that was so if the end result was I felt really good that I had a conclusion that I could. I thought, well, that's great. I've got what I needed, and that ring of confidence around the patient was brilliant, I thought.
Tricia, Sue, Charles.
I'm fascinated by this conversation, and I apologise I didn't have time to actually listen to it. But for me, this has raised so many fundamental questions that we need to understand what the commissioners of 111 are going to want, because we need to be very clear about what the service is, and is that the sort of service they want. So actually getting commissioner feedback about precisely what it is they want to commission. And us being clear about what it is we're providing, whether it would be a triage system or what's the expectation of the nurse, is absolutely fundamental to getting to the bottom of actually defining the 111 service within, obviously, the national requirements. There's a lot of subtleties here that we really have to understand the Commissioner's perspective.
Okay, I'm going to put myself in, then I'm going to go to Nick. So he's probably forgotten what it was.
No, that's fine.
Tricia, if we said, understanding, given what Sue said and the conversation we've just had, if we decided this is really important and we would like to take the time to identify the nurse advisor calls, find out if there was a nurse assessment in there, these particular two, could you do that?
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, my sense is we should do that.
Yeah.
And that should be our next call. And if you could add a couple more, I mean, given how short they are, if you could do the same thing for a couple we haven't heard, I would suggest you do. But it seems to me that it's worth just drilling down on this one. And I think by then, Tim, you'll have run it through a symptom checker, and Brian, you'll have had a conversation. So let's not, tick it and move on. Let's hang on to this.
I'm not sure if I'm going to sum it up, but I mean, I'll make my contribution and then offer an opinion. I think that the thing that struck me forcibly, and I guess it's the same point that others have been making, is that actually this placed a lot more reliance on the patient.
Yeah.
That the calls actually, the question was framed by the patient, and whilst the answer wasn't, very much the question was, and clearly that suits a conversation where the patient is very clear about what it is that is the issue. But I think, as we know, problems sometimes are diagnosed retrospectively, and the conclusion is reached that at the time that the patient was talking to the doctor, it should have been obvious that ... whereas in fact that's only obvious 24 hours later following face-to-face examination. And I just think that there's whilst it's superficially attractive to have a kind of question and answer, clear-cut, short and sharp, I just think that the one case in 1,000 or the one case in 100 where actually further exploration, meandering as you might call it, is actually going to be necessary. And what I find is that I'm on the, as it were, the sharp end of responding to patients or patients' relatives or on the advice of Tricia and others about those cases where it's actually not the usual case, it's the unusual case. So I just proffer that as a kind of thought process. But the kind of general point that I would make is it's clearly we get learning by understanding differences. differences here from other calls that we've heard. So I think that's what we should pursue, is understanding those differences.
Louisa?
I think, I used the word meandering, so I think it is, I think your triage is interesting. I'm sure there's an evidence-based triage, but in a way it's a bit like, go into hospital and you'll be safe. Ask somebody lots and lots of questions and triage them and you'll be safe. And I'm just not sure how clear we are that the things that are missed are in a way anything to do with that or other sort of factors. I'm saying I think it is really complicated, and I think to start from a standpoint where you are defining what the patient's problem is from the patient, and that's your service. I mean, sometimes I suppose I'm not always as confident as I might be that we're trying to put the patient into our system.
I wasn't defining what was right and what was wrong. I was just an observation.
I think it's really interesting. That's what I'm saying, is that I don't know whether it's it's all the aspects of the triage that are about the safety, and whether you can change that and still be safe.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to stop this because I know we're going to return to these calls. So Trisha, I think it was a very good choice of calls. It was very interesting. We like the patient journey. If you can find a couple of we haven't heard, in particular, I mean, if there are any that have had any incidents that might illuminate this, that would be even better. And we know that, I mean, I've certainly seen SUIs that have come across my desktop, as it were, that have related to doctor calls, or things that we've missed. That would be interesting. I don't think that's necessary, but if we could do that, that would be good. All right, thank you, everybody. We're going to move on to any other business, which is the last item on the agenda of our public board meeting today. I haven't been notified of any other business. Keisha, you haven't? None? Okay. In that case, I'd like to thank everybody, and I would like to close the public part of this board meeting today, noting that the next meeting will be here on the 27th of June at 10:30.